Harry, how are you feeling? You're 94 years old.
I can't believe 95, but I can feel. I've said 95. I just added a year. I can't believe 94, but I can feel it. You know, I have pains in places I didn't know I had places.
So what did you do to celebrate you yesterday?
Nothing much. I spent time with my family. That's it. With Robert, my son, and Elizabeth, my daughter-in-law,
Yeah.
and Evie, my gorgeous little granddaughter, who just turned 8. Can't believe it.
Wow.
I can't believe I turned 94. So I don't think.
Gosh. Yeah, that's amazing. Did you get any good calls from your old friends? You got some
Yes.
out there.
Oh, yes. The phone didn't stop ringing, and the mail, all the wonderful greeting cards. And yeah, a lot of old friends called. The last one that called, I spoke to David Regal just before I hung up and went to bed last night.
Wow.
So yeah, a lot of old friends called. And, it's very nice to be remembered.
Well, this is being recorded, so just so everybody knows, I know that some of you, maybe not, you won't have all the time in the world. Hopefully you can stick around for the whole time, but just know that I am recording this, so you'll be getting that, I don't know, probably tomorrow. So I'm looking at the chat box. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question? If you could, just say, I've got one, Rudy, and then what I'll do is I'm gonna go highlight your video. And this is from Joe. Let me, Joe, do you have a microphone? Let me know, and if so, then I can just highlight your video. And then you can ask Harry yourself. And if you don't, then that's okay too. I do see that you're muted. I can unmute you. Do you want to go ahead and ask Harry a question? I'm speaking of Joe Homan.
Well, that's me. Hi, Harry. Happy birthday.
Hey, Joe, how you doing? Well, I hear you okay. I'm amazed.
Great. I come back to your books time and again. I've read a number of them, but there are some wonderful stories in the Magic book where you talk about your early days performing, as a young kid, really. And I wondered if you would retell some of those stories. I think they're great. Also, I was wondering, as a kid, how did you get into magic? How did you learn it? Did you read books? Did you have a mentor? Those kinds of things.
No, good questions. Actually, I can only answer the second part of your question. You're asking how I got into magic, I think. And God, I've written about this. And, I don't know if it's in the magic book. I thought it was in my memoir, which Mel Brooks told me to call a re-memoir, But the story, what happened, I'll try to cut it short. I was the shyest kid in the world. I mean, to the point of sickness, okay? I never made eye contact with anybody. I never spoke to anybody unless they spoke to me first, etc. I'm talking about now when I was about 10 and a half, 11 years old. After school, I used to go to a park. It was called the Pitt Street Park, just a few blocks from where I lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which was a ghetto. I didn't know that word at that time. And there was no television at that time, so I thought the whole world was like that. It was really terrible. I'm an original dead-end kid, born right off the East River on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in New York City. Anyway, I'd go to that park, and there was a counselor there who would teach us little guys, and there were a couple of girls there too, shuffleboard, paddle tennis, things like that. But one day, it was a pouring rain started, and he had to take us indoors, of course, and he did. But he didn't really know what to do with us indoors. He was good at teaching us shuffleboard and paddle tennis, but he didn't know what to do with us indoors. End of story. He did a card trick for us, and that changed my life. Because as I sat there watching him, I said, to myself, oh my God, if I could only do that. Oh, if I could do that. And the end of that story is he had done the trick. As I was walking home, I went over it in my mind. I tried to figure it out. I needed a deck of cards to go off on a little tangent. I had no money. My family, my father and mother were professional poor people. We had no money. I lived in a tenement, And in those days, I've gone back, my gosh, I've gone back almost 90 years ago, people would put their empty glass, it was only glass in those days, the milk didn't come in cardboard cartons, it was only glass bottles. They would put the empty bottles outside, and the milkman would come take the empty bottles and put full bottles in their place. I think I can say this now without being arrested. I stole about 9 or 10 bottles to get the deposit because they were maybe, I don't remember really that so long ago, they were 2 pennies or 3 pennies a bottle. I do remember that the cheapest deck of cards that I could buy in those days was 18 cents. So I stole enough bottles, like 9 bottles, I guess, to get 18 cents to buy a deck of cards and to try to work out this trick that I saw the counselor do. And again, long story short, I came up with 4 different ways to do it. And one of those 4 ways was much better than what the counselor had done. Now I got into a very strange situation. What I'm reminded of is the cliche, if a large tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there, does it make a sound? I thought of that because I'm thinking of, well, I could do this great card trick. If I don't demonstrate it or perform it for anyone, what's the point to make it sound? That started really to change my life, because now, if I wanted to show the card trick to somebody, I had to say at least 3 words. I had to say, pick a card. And that's what happened. I started to say, pick a card. I started to do the trick. And I did it for different people on the sidewalks of the Lower East Side of New York. Before you know it, people started, some of my friends who call, hey, Magish, they started to call me Magish. They said, hey, Magish, can you do another trick? Well, I didn't know another trick, and I didn't want to do another trick similar to the one I just did. That's when I started to go to the library and try to find books that would help me learn card tricks. Problem is, way back, all those decades I'm going back, the magic books that I found were books that taught you tricks with magnets, with wires, with strings, with rope, things that I didn't care about. When I found a couple of card tricks in a book, oh God, I used to smell the pages and take out the book and clutch it to my chest and run home to read it. So anyway, that's the way it started. That's how I started to learn card magic. I didn't know any other magicians at that time. I didn't know any of the really good books that I learned later on in life, only the ones I found in the library in those days, which were not very good. In any case, I hope I answered your question.
That was a really great question, Joe. I appreciate you asking that. We have some questions here. One is from Helder Sousa. Now, Helder, I don't know if you have a microphone. Do you want to go ahead and I can unmute you so you can ask Harry yourself, or otherwise I can ask for you. I will. Can you unmute yourself? I don't know if you have a microphone or not. What he's asking is, he'd just like to know if there's any new projects that you're planning here at this stage of your life.
You know, it's interesting. It was put on the side. My son and daughter-in-law, Elizabeth, want to put it out. I've gotten to the point where I can write it, but that's all I want to do. They want to put out an ebook called More Jaw Droppers. I've written it. They're going to take care of it. The little problem is it was put on the side because of the virus we're having now, the thing that's changing the world, and that my little brilliant daughter-in-law, she's a brilliant kid, but it seems she has a little bit of a learning disability. So they're going into the school, finding different schools, blah, blah, blah. So they put that project on the side. They will eventually put it out as an ebook. And that will be the last thing I think I'll do. I've thought of a couple of new tricks since then. You know, I can't help it. You know what I do with night? You know what puts me to sleep at night? I start to think of card magic. That's what puts me to sleep at night. So I come up with new ideas. So I've come up with a few things since I wrote this thing that I just told you about, the ebook of More Jaw Droppers. But I don't think I'll ever get to a point of writing them up.
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough to have been sent a copy of this ebook of Harry's, and there's some good stuff in there. I demonstrate one of them called "Try This" with my bride
That's
at
right.
the table. So you still have a very fertile mind, Harry. It's great. David Gerard is asking. He says, "Have you ever taught a trick that uses $2.80 worth of change?" He says, "I feel like you have, but I can't find it anywhere." Do you remember a trick like that, or did you forget to remember a trick like that?
I've forgotten. I've written too many darn books and come up with too many darn tricks. And people ask me about some of them, and they've gone out of my mind. No, I don't recall. I didn't do much coin magic. I did do a matrix kind of thing with coins. I did do a coins through the table. That's a good memory of mine because I think I wrote about this. I was doing it at a magic club, I guess, my coins through the table. And Roy Benson was in the order. Roy Benson was a member. He was in the audience. I don't know how many people nowadays know the name Roy Benson, but he was a very well-known magician, was known worldwide. Anyway, when I finished this, he stood up and said, "Harry, I was a very young guy. I don't know how old I was, 20 years old, if that, but much younger." And he said, "That is the best coin through the table I've ever seen." That's why I remember it, to get that kind of flattering compliment. But other than that, the $2.80, no, I don't recall anything like that.
Well, with so many fans here of your work on the call, I imagine that somebody will, in the comment area, mention that trick. I have my friend Johnny New York who'd like to ask you a question. Johnny, I'm going to go highlight your video, my friend, and it's all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Rudy. First of all, hello to everyone. Happy birthday, Harry Lorayne. What an honor to be in the same room with you, man.
Well, thank you, Johnny. I can see you. Your hair is the same color as mine.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, I have to say real quickly, I know a lot of guys have questions. Your book was the first book I ever purchased with Magic, which was a classic collection. And in the introduction, or at the very beginning, you're the guy that taught me how to do a Faro shuffle. And it was just like one little paragraph, but that's what I needed to read, and that's what did it, So I definitely am honored and owe you for that. But
that's interesting. That's interesting because so many people, Johnny, have told me that, and like you just said, I gave it 2 or 3 paragraphs.
Right.
Pop Hayden, Whit Hayden, it's his real name. I think magicians know him. He says that he learned the Faro shuffle from close-up card magic, and that was reprinted. I reprinted that and updated it in the Classic Collection, Volume 1.
Yes.
Which incidentally is out of print. So if any of you listening did want it, I'm sorry, I don't have it anymore.
And the line that really, really got it was, do it till you absolutely can't do it, or something like that. That's when you do it till you want to give up. That's when you'll get it.
That's it. When you're ready to throw the deck away, do it one more time, and you've done it. It just worked.
Yes.
Right.
Anyway, my question is this, and that is, you are famous for working with a borrowed deck, a borrowed shuffle deck. That's the only thing. I want to ask you, now we have a technology age, and it seems like gaffs and gaff cards and gaff gimmicks with magnets are just everywhere. The mark deck kind of thing. When did you get the idea of using only a borrowed deck, or was that always the way you worked?
Not always, but it happened many, many decades ago. Even when I was doing, I'll tell you this, and then I'll get back to the basic question. It's a message. You just disappeared, Johnny. I don't know why. I see myself, but that you can hear me, I assume.
Oh, definitely.
Can you?
Yes.
I was doing table magic. I must have been 19 years old. And even then, way back then, when I was doing some stuff at a table, every once in a while, the gentleman would say, "Oh, Harry, I'm having a bar mitzvah for my son, or I'm having this kind of party. Can you come and do this kind of magic for us?" And I said, of course. I was always looking to make a buck in those days. Like I said before, I was a very poor kid, but I was making decent money now in a place called Billy Reed's Little Club in the 50s in New York City. I mean, I was making, look, Frank Sinatra used to come in. And Frank Sinatra only carried $100 bills. So when I did some magic for him and I got a tip, it was at least $100. You know? So I was doing pretty well, you know. Anyway, the reason I mentioned that, when people said to me, can we book you to do some magic for us? I said, sure. And we started to arrange payment, you know, how much I would charge. And then, and this is the point, I would say also, would you get 2 decks of cards, either bicycles or tally-ho, one red-backed, one blue-backed. And when you introduce me, I want you to give me those decks and tell the audience that they are your cards, not mine. So even way back then, I knew the importance of saying I'm not using my own deck. Now, I'll take this further, and I've said it so often, I've written it so often. If you use your own deck of cards, no matter how good your card magic is, you're going to lose anywhere from 10 to 20% of the effectiveness of that trick, whatever trick you're doing, if you're using your deck of cards. That's it. There's no way to change that, because the better the trick is, and this is going to sound egotistical, but at my age, I don't care. I'm going to say it as it is. The kind of card tricks I did were so and are so impossible that the only answer 99% of laymen will think or say is, it's got to be a trick deck. Now, I remember telling this at a lecture for magicians, and one magician said, and I've heard this so many times, he said, no, Harry, well, when I finish working, I give somebody my deck of cards. So they see it's a regular deck. And I said, you may think that works, but I know it doesn't, because I tried that 100 years ago. I gave a woman, I can still picture her after I did magic, card magic, I gave her the deck of cards, which in those days was my own, all those many decades ago. I gave her the deck of cards, and she said, I can still visualize her, and I can still hear her words. She held the deck in her hands, and she said, I'm not a magician. I can't find the magic in it. In other words, it didn't help. She and the rest of the lay audience still felt that what I did was so impossible that it had to be a trick deck. Now, making an audience think that what you do is so impossible, that's great. That's the whole point. But do it with their deck, and it changes the entire concept. I hope I've answered your question.
Great advice, great answer. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Oh, my pleasure.
You're going to have to forgive me if I get the names wrong, but a gentleman by the name of Dan Hajar wants to ask a question. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute your phone, Dan, and you can please feel free to go ahead and ask Harry your question.
Thank you, Rudy. Hi, Harry. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
We just met a couple of years ago. I picked you up at your home and drove you to Vince's magic shop, Diamond's Magic, for some lectures.
Oh, say your name.
Dan Hajar.
Okay, good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Just a question I had, and you've answered some of it already, but I was wondering if when you started out in card magic, or even when you became established in card magic, did you ever have like a practice routine, like a set of things you did every day that were kind of like maintenance? So you know what I'm saying? Like a set of shuffles, a set of cuts, things you practiced on a regular basis.
Yeah, you know, I was very careful with the thing. You know, I wrote in the foreword of the magic book, I said, one of the things I want to do here is save you the 40 years at that time. This is back in 1977, I think I wrote it. I said, I want to save you the 40 years that I wasted practicing and learning sleights that I never used. So that's very important to me. Yeah, I practiced a lot of things. I just said this to somebody today or the other day. I learned the diagonal palm shift. Oh God, I have small hands, and it was small when I learned this all those decades ago. I learned it. I did it. I never used it. What a waste of time. So my point, and I've also written, if you know a good double lift, a good control, and a force, a good force could be considered a control. So if you have a good double lift of turnover, a good force, and a good palm, you could do miracles. Really do miracles with the deck of cards. And then you learn other things as you go along. I mean, I've written that the overhand in-jog shuffle covers a multitude of sins. That to me is a very important thing to know with the deck of cards. But to answer your specific question, I practiced some things when I was very young, the things that I felt I was going to use. And then as time went by, I dropped those that I never had to use in front of an audience. That's what did it for me. I never really planned it. I don't even know how to explain it. I started to do magic for people. People started to ask me to do magic wherever I was. They started to learn that if they wanted me to do magic for their people that they had invited to their party, they better have a deck of cards there, because they knew I wasn't going to carry my own deck. They started to realize that. And so as the years went by, when I was very young, I started to drop a lot of the things that I practiced because I never needed them. I never had to use them. So again, I hope I've answered your question.
You have. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right, I'm going to pass it next to Evan Bishop, who has a question that I've asked you before too. But I'm going to go ahead and let you ask Evan. You can unmute your mic and feel free to talk to Harry. Hopefully it works. Let's see. I see. Do you got it? I can unmute.
To me, this is magic.
Yeah. Do you got it?
Really?
Evan, can you, are you able to get your mic working? Oh, bummer. Well, I don't know if he's able to get it working, but essentially, like, Harry, I know the difficulty of trying to produce something weekly, really, with the Real Magic Magazine thing that I'm doing for Apocalypse Now. I'm just teaching one trick a week, and you've already done the work. You've already found the good stuff and put it in Apocalypse. I just have to, go ahead and perform that. And to think that you had to do that every month is just beyond me. Were there ever any times, and this is getting to Evan's question, was there ever a time when you almost weren't able to get that issue out? Was there a month where you're like, I just can't make this happen?
Oh God, I'm starting to, I almost started to cry when you asked that question, because it's bringing back those memories when I don't even know how to explain it. The magazine started in 1978, went to 1997 or something like that. This was one of the most important eras of my life. Those years, I was traveling all over the world. I'm knocking wood mentally. I was very busy and making a lot of money at that time because my salaries were going up. I was in demand. I'll tell you, I don't like to brag, but I don't care. I'm going to tell you anyway. When I was in New York, my fee west of the Mississippi was $15,000 plus expenses. My fee to the east of the Mississippi, closer to me, because I lived on the east side of New York, was $12,500 plus expenses. So I was making a lot of money, and I was traveling all over the world. This was important when, at the same time, I was trying to put out Apocalypse. And, there were like 3,000 people who wanted to get Apocalypse every month. And I guess that was part of I wonder if I would feel the same today, but I felt that these 3,000 people deserved to get the magazine on time. You also have to remember that those were, there was no computer then, not that I would have been able to do it on a computer anyway. And I used an old-fashioned typewriter when I started, like an old-fashioned Royal typewriter with the keys sticking up like that. And I had to bang on them. I couldn't make the margins, work on the right side. I didn't have a typewriter like that beginning. And in those days, the only way to do it is what was called cut and paste. I rewrote every trick that was sent to me. Now, Very rarely did somebody send me a trick that I maybe had to go over and edit out a few words. Excuse me, I'm getting so emotional over this, excuse me. I usually had to rewrite every trick that was sent to me. I mean, really had to rewrite it because there was ego involved too. I was not about to publish a trick that I thought people were going to read and say to themselves, gee, I don't get that. I don't understand it. I would not allow that. I never allowed it in any of my books, and I wasn't about to allow it in Apocalypse. So I'm not putting down people that sent me their tricks. Maybe they could teach it better ordinarily, and maybe what they sent me, the writings that they sent me were fine, but I always rewrote them to teach them my way, okay? I don't mean that egotistically, but that's what I did. That's what I felt was better. Why do I mention that? To tell you about all the time that I had to put into that. I was up to 3, 4 in the morning, many mornings, working on Apocalypse. And you know what? I got it out on time for 20 years. Well, 19 years. The first year, somebody else was helping me do it. But for the 19 years, I got it out on time.
Awesome.
So, you know, that's it. That's how it worked, basically, Apocalypse. You know, I talk so much, I forgot your question. I hope I answered it.
You answered it. That was great. It's just a lot of time, and I think just your commitment to those who bought into Apocalypse. I mean, you're faithful in that. I've heard a number of the stories of how you were so committed to making sure that you followed through on your commitments to people that I don't know if you want to tell the story. You go to Real Magic Magazine, and there's a number of these interviews that I've done with Harry where he expands on a lot of these stories, and you hear the stuff that he put himself through to get to a gig just so he wouldn't miss it. Harry, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't.
Which one are you talking about, Rudy?
Well, gosh, I'm thinking of the time when you nearly bought an airplane just to get.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I almost bought an airplane. Not because I'm such a wise guy that I was going to do this. I was told. The guy's name who ran these shows or forums, whatever you call it, and I'm not making this up, his name was Benjamin Franklin. That was really his name. And he had a thing called the Knife and Fork Clubs that I don't know if he started them or what, but there were clubs like that all over the country that many people belonged to. And he would book acts for those clubs. At least he did for a lot of them. I don't know, maybe he had somebody else doing it also. But one of his things, and at least he said it to me, I guess he said it to other acts that he may have been booking, he said, no matter what it costs, no matter what you have to go through, you must make the show I book you for. I don't ever want to hear that you couldn't get there. And that's the way I played it. And this was one time, terrible weather. I'm not sure where it was. It was somewhere where I was far away from home. I couldn't call friends or anything. And he had said, if you're going to buy an airplane, buy it. He said, afterwards, I'll sell it. That was his attitude. And I kind of appreciated it. You don't want people to be disappointed. Anyway, long story short, I was going to buy an airplane. I started to make calls, or I went to a police station. I asked him, can you help me? Where would I go to buy an airplane? Finally, somebody said to me, why do you want to buy one? Harry, rent it. For God's sakes, rent an airplane, and you're going to have to rent a pilot anyway. Because I couldn't fly. So he said, oh, okay, that's better. It'll be cheaper, and all I needed is for this one trip to take me there and take me back to my hotel. Long story short, it got to a point where that became a problem. The weather was bad for flying. Of course, I did call a couple of pilots, and they said, well, we don't know. We'll see how the weather turns out, blah, blah, blah. End of story. I hired a guy to drive me there. I got there late to the show in this bad weather. People were waiting. I don't know if people nowadays would do that, but they waited for quite some time for me to show up, I think the driver, I asked him to call. I don't remember if he had a cell phone in those days or if he stopped somewhere to use a regular landline. to call them, and somehow he let them know that I was on my way. And when I got there, I'm telling you, I was tired, I was upset, but I did the show and they were thrilled. So I was happy. That made my day. Listen, when you're an act, at least for me, I want to entertain an audience. That's the important part of my life, or was for most of my life.
Great answer, Harry. Very cool. We have a very familiar name here who would like to ask you a question. Mr. Rafael Benatar de España. He wants to ask you a question. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight your video, Rafael.
I see you, Rafael.
Hey, good to see you, Harry. Before I ask you a question, I would like to remember the first time I met you. It was at Ruben's cafeteria near Tannen.
Yes.
And I was so thrilled to meet you, and you showed me so many tricks that I didn't remember any of them.
I don't remember them either, so don't feel bad.
And I showed you just one, and you asked me to publish it in Apocalypse. And I didn't even need to send you the write-up. You just remembered.
Wow.
I used one of your tricks in Apocalypse, right?
Yes, it was Countdown of Code. Yes.
Right.
I would like to ask you a question.
Sure.
I'm so thrilled to see you. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
A long time ago, I had a rare encounter with Percy Diaconis, and we were discussing magicians and card magic and everything. And you came up in the conversation, and he said you are to be credited for being the first one who ever performed card magic in an entertaining, lighthearted way.
That was very nice, yes.
How did that happen?
Oh, well, if I understand your question, Raphael, my desire all my life was to be an entertainer. When I was a young kid, I wanted to be like Danny Kaye. I don't know how many people listening here now even remember Danny Kaye, but he was a fantastic star. He was a fantastic entertainer, singing, dancing, telling jokes, everything. That's what I wanted to be like. As time went by, sadly, I realized that I couldn't be like him. You know why? I couldn't sing, I couldn't dance, and I couldn't tell jokes.
Yeah.
So I couldn't be like Danny Kaye, but I still wanted to be an entertainer. And I've written this quite a few times. I am known, fortunately, gratefully, throughout the world for two things: card magic and memory. And I've written about this. These two things are my medias of entertainment. Basically, I'm an entertainer.
Yeah.
I've said this, and I'm going to say it again. I've written this. I don't care if you flap your arms like this and fly around the room. If you don't entertain the audience, you're going to put them to sleep while you're flying around the room. Mm-hmm. In other words, that's what it boils down to, is to be an entertainer. Listen, I have spent, let's see, I'm trying to forget, I'm 94. I'm 94. When I was in my early 20s, I started to do a memory act with my wife. She worked with me. We did it together for 20 years. And when it started, and basically when my first book came out, which was a few years after Renee and I did the act together, many people started to steal my act. I mean, I remember seeing people sitting in my audiences with a legal pad, looking at me, writing down the words I was saying. So there were many people who were doing the memory. After all, they could do it. I was teaching it in my books, so they could do the memory work. And now they were imitating me word for word. And the reason I'm telling you this is they would start, I would hear about them, and then they would disappear. You know why? They put their audiences to sleep. Doing the same things I did.
Yeah.
That's the point. I'm basically an entertainer. So when these people said they thought that just doing memory, you know what? I've written this also. What could be more boring than to see somebody on stage for 45 minutes to an hour remembering things. Okay? That's my point. Basically, you've got to be an entertainer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Harry. Great to see you.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope, you know, so a few people wrote this, Raphael and Rudy. It's very hard to start Harry Lorayne, but it's much harder to stop him. So I hope I'm not talking too much.
It's perfect.
I love it. I enjoy it when you go off on what you consider tangents. I find absolutely fascinating. We have a question from Leo Reynolds, and Leo wants to know if your son Bobby ever took an interest in magic at all.
No, I can answer that very quickly. The answer is no. He stayed away, from magic and memory altogether. He got into music, which I don't know at all. I'm not good at it at all. I can't carry a tune in a basket, you know. I once asked a friend of mine who was a very well-known psychiatrist, I mentioned this, and he said, it's not surprising, Harry, if you were, again, this is going to sound very egotistical, but I can't help it. You asked the question, I got answered. He said, if you were just a normal guy doing ordinary card tricks and doing some memory things, he would have been interested. He said, the fact that you are known all over the world doing these things, he does not want to compete with you. That's what the psychiatrist told me. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I never discussed it with Robert, with my son. I call him Bobby. I'm the only one that calls him Bobby. He doesn't like anyone to call him Bobby. He likes Robert, but I called him Bobby all his life and my life. I never discussed it with him. I let him do what he wanted to do. And he got into, like I say, an area that I was completely ignorant of, and that was music. He's still into that. So that's the answer to that question. No, he never got into either card magic at all, any kind of magic, or memory work.
All right.
Oh, let me put one more point. When he's going to school, and he would come to me with a specific, simple those for that age problem, I would teach him how to remember it. That's it. And I would never go deeper into it to say this also can be applied to so-and-so. Because after I spoke to the psychiatrist, I knew better. I didn't want to do that. And it's been fine all our lives.
Thanks, Harry. We have a question from Franz Clement.
Hi, Harry. First of
Hi,
all,
good to see you.
First of all, happy birthday.
Thank you
Everyone
so
says
much.
it, but I have to say it too. My question is, besides being a legendary card magician, you are also known as a memory artist, like you said yourself. How did you get into it?
Oh boy, I could write a book to answer that question, but I'll try to make it very short.
I appreciated this.
Yeah, first of all, I'm dyslexic. You know, I wrote an article decades ago titled How Bad Can Become Good. Being dyslexic is a bad thing, but that changed my life. Now, how can I explain this? In those days, when I'm talking when I was 10 and a half, 11 years old, there was a teacher by the name of Mrs. Goldfisher. I'll never forget her. She used to give us a test every day on a yellow rectangular paper, which we had a number from 1 to 10, and she would ask 10 questions. Questions on things she had mentioned in the classroom or that we had read on pages that she had told us to read in a book. The reason I mentioned that is we had to bring it home every day for at least one parent to sign. The signee, my signee was my father, who died when I was 12, so you can see how far back I'm going. And the point here is that I was getting marks like 40 and 50 on these tests whereas all my classmates were getting passing grades, you know, 70, 75, 80, 90, whatever. It was my dyslexia, but I found out in those days, I never heard the word dyslexic. I don't even know if the teachers knew that word. And again, I've written about this, you know, they stamped me moron. They give you the name, you play the game. I thought I was a moron. The point is, Johnny Carson on the Tonight Show once said to me, Harry, how does a these, dems, those kid from the Lower East Side with hardly any education, no money, no height, whatever, become the world's leading memory training expert? And I said, stomach cramps. And he turned white under his makeup because he thought I went nuts. And I said, no. I said, no, let me explain what I mean. What I meant was, I had stomach cramps every morning, and one day I realized that it was only Monday to Friday. I didn't have them on Saturday and Sunday. In other words, school days. I was afraid, and I said this on the Carson show also, and I got a lot of negative because of it. I said my father, when he looked at my grades, would punch me. That changed to he would punish me. That was okay. But I said punch me. That was bad. The Carson show got thousands of letters saying, what a terrible thing to say. You know? Okay, so I say he punished me. That's what gave me stomach cramps. I was afraid carrying this 40 grade test home that my father was going to hit me. That's when I stopped walking to school. In those days, I had to walk to school. There were no buses, etc. I stopped and I said to myself, how can I avoid my father hitting me? How can I avoid these stomach cramps? And I answered myself, very simple, get better grades on your tests. Great. How do I get better grades on my tests? And I answered myself, and that changed my life, really. I said, you stupid son of a, learn to remember the answer to the questions you're asked. That changed my life. The next thing I did, I was at a library. I asked a lady, I could still visualize her, because like I say, these were life-changing moments for me. And I told her I got to learn how to remember. She took me to a room in the corner of the library. I swear there were cobwebs all over the doors. Nobody had been in there in decades. We cleared it, and I walked in, and she pointed to a corner of the room, and there were a bunch of books about this wide, many of which are now in my basement downstairs, dating back to the 1700s, 1600s, on how to remember training. I started to read them. I was in there for 2 hours. The lady kept opening the door to see that I was okay, you know. But again, remember, I was 10 and a half, 11 years old. I didn't understand 99.9999 of the stuff I was reading, particularly since it was written in English, but in language from all those centuries ago. But the point, 99999, whatever, that I did understand changed my life. What I didn't realize I was doing was that the things I did understand, those little pieces, I changed to fit my problem. How do you remember that the capital of Maryland is not Baltimore, etc.? How do you remember that? How do you remember it's Annapolis? Like I say, that changed my life. And I started to remember all the things I felt I had to remember, that I thought Mrs. Goldfisher was going to ask on those damn 10-question tests. And I started to get hundreds. I didn't have stomach cramps anymore. My father didn't have a reason to punch me anymore. And one day, I'm walking into the classroom, and Mrs. Goldfisher is sitting at her desk, and she says, Harry, come here, I want to ask you something. She said, what's happening? You're getting hundreds on the test, which I always felt you should have, because you're a heck of a smart kid otherwise. What in the world happened? And I said, well, I learned how to remember. She said, well, what do you mean? Okay, I used the example I mentioned before. I said, for example, I wanted to remember that question you asked, what's the capital of Maryland? Well, what I learned that making one thing remind you of the other is the secret of a good memory. It's putting things together. And I used the word I had just learned, association. You've got to associate one thing to another. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, when I wanted to remember that the capital of Maryland is Annapolis, I pointed to a girl in the classroom whose name was Mary. I said, I pictured a girl named Mary, and I saw an apple landing, Mary land, an apple landing, an apple is landing on Mary's head. An apple is. Just visualizing what I just told you. And as I was talking, now this is interesting. As I was talking, I saw Mrs. Goldfish's eyes blank out. And she said, all right, Harry, take your seat. She thought I was going nuts. So I said, maybe it's best not to tell people these things. They think I'm crazy. But my classmates who were the same age as me, 11, whatever, that age, oh, Harry, explain that. And I started to explain it to some of the kids, and they started to apply it. You know, kids at 11 years of age have a much better imagination than adults, except for the ones that read my books. Because, and I once wrote, even if my systems don't work, they must work. Now that sounds very contradictory, obviously, but I know exactly what I'm talking about. What I mean is, if you try to apply my systems, you are forcing yourself to do things you never ordinarily would do. Most important, pay attention, listen, look, concentrate, use your imagination, which sounds like work, but not when you're doing it for a purpose. That, of course, is the whole point of memory training. So in order to learn more about what I'm talking about, you got to buy one of my books.
We have a question from Jim Beck, and then Mike Powers has a video that he's going to share here that everybody can see from 1991, you performing at the 4F convention. So while kind of getting that set up, he's a wizard at that kind of stuff. I'm going to ask Jim to go ahead and unmute your mic if you're able to. I'll give you a few seconds to see if you're able to do that, and let me know if that's possible. And if not, I can ask the question for you. But I'm just trying to give everybody the opportunity to actually talk to you themselves. I mean, I can ask you the questions, but it's
Yeah, incidentally, I am sure some people are asking why I'm wearing sunglasses. I have a red eye, okay? I don't know if it shows. I've lived with it for 7 years now. It seems the lower lid went away from, detached itself. And I've gone to a few eye doctors, they can't do anything about it. So I just want you to know, I don't like the look of it, and I'm sure you don't, which is why I'm wearing the sunglasses, okay?
Oh, it's all right. I mean, you always say getting old sucks. I can't, you know, you always talk about because you were such a handsome young man, and you say,
Yeah, I hate the way I look now, Rudy.
well, hey, you're 90.
I was a very good-looking guy. I never took advantage of it.
Look at this picture here. What is this? There's the man. Look at that.
Oh boy, I don't even remember where that picture comes from.
Well, that's Franz. Which book is that? It must be, where are you from, Franz?
This is a book that was published by the Magic Central in Munich decades ago. Harold Voigt is the manager of this section of the Magic Circle of Germany, and he had a library, and he published the personal personal secrets of Harry Lorayne, but in German translation.
She never sent me any money.
Oh, well, that sucks. Tommy Ellison is asking if that was drawn by Richard Kaufman. Does it say who the artist was? Because
I don't think so.
No?
No.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that, Franz. That's awesome. So Jim is not able to get his camera to work. But essentially, he was asking, what was one of the most memorable responses to your magic, or I would say maybe to a performance? I know a couple, but what is your most memorable?
I can't think of anyone specific. I mean, I can tell you there were people, particularly women, they would scream, you know, after I finished doing a card trick, and there was some men that would get up and start to applaud, and so that I've been doing this for so many years, it all starts to blend. So I got great reactions. I was going to say obviously, but that again sounds egotistically. I don't care. I got great reactions, obviously, but I can't think of anything really specific.
Harry, tell them about the time when you made a whole audience disappear. Remember, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember?
It was a very busy time of my career. I was doing morning show. My wife was working with me. She worked with me for 20 years. I want you people to understand that. She used to introduce me, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, blah, blah, blah. And she'd talk about me and introduce me and help me with the little things in the act, writing on the blackboard, putting giant cards on another blackboard. After 20 years, we were driving home from a show, and Renee turned to me and she said, "Hon, I never, ever want to say, 'Good evening, ladies and gentlemen,' again." And she never did. She thought it was time for us to have a child, which we did. That's Robert, my wonderful son. I can't believe he is 52 years old. But anyway, she worked with me for 20 years. Now, I mention her because we're flying to do a show in Washington, D.C. at the Statler Hotel. I believe, we used to do a lot of shows there. And I said, because I had been doing 2-3 shows a day for the last month or so, and I said, God, I hope it's a small audience. Because don't forget, I'm saying don't forget, I don't know if you realize this, that the important, at least the opening, and to me, the important part of my appearances was to remember the names of everybody in the audience. That's work. It's not only work mentally, as I got older, and right now, when I got into my 80s and 90s, it was very difficult physically, because like I'd go to a big meeting thing where people are having dinner, where I am the speaker on the show afterwards. I had to walk around that room with all the tables to meet all the people. So even physically, it was difficult. So I'm trying to explain my rationale for saying to Renee over and over again, God, I hope it's a small audience, because I was very tired. Okay, we get to the hotel, and we do what we did for 20 years. We signed in, registered at the hotel. I went up to the room to rest, to grab a nap if I needed one. And Renee would go to the room. She'd find out where the room was, where we were working, where we were appearing, and she would check the room. One of the things she always checked, a lot of people did this, they didn't realize. She'd come into a large room where there were tables all around, except in the front where there was a big dancing area for people to dance, which is fine if it's an evening of music and dancing. But I didn't like that. I hated that. That was terrible. I want my audience in front of me. And Renee knew that, of course. So she would speak to the people involved and say, no, fill up that whole area with tables. Get them close to the stage. And that's what she did. And she would check the sound equipment, etc. Okay, I go up to my room at this particular day, and I'm resting, and she comes upstairs. She says, hon, it's a small audience. Nothing to worry about. It's a small audience. The point was, I had my rest. We're ready to go down to the room to meet the people. We walk down, and there's a big sign in front of the room where I'm appearing. And on the sign, it says, "The Little People of America." It was a group of midgets. And it was, at that time, it seemed a very important, I don't know if it's still around, the Little People of America. I'm not sure. I think it had to be shorter than 3.5 or 3 feet in order to join. And there was the president I knew, I can't think of his name at the moment, I'll think of it as we talk, who was a cigar smoker. I used to kid with him saying the cigar is longer than you're tall, He used to smoke big, long cigars. Anyway,
you're thinking
the point of, I'm sorry?
Billy Barty. Billy
Say
Barty.
it again. Billy Barty, of course, thank you. He was in those days, very well known. He did some very good acting and etc. Anyway, what they did in this room, difficult is what they took out all the regular chairs, obviously, because if you're 3.5 feet tall and sitting in a chair, they serve you a steak, you have to be cutting it like that. In other words, your head was, you couldn't see. What they did, they took all the chairs away and got tall stools for everyone in the audience, so they were sitting above the table so they could look down at their steak as they're cutting it, okay? Okay, long story short, I meet all the people. We got a lot of laughs because this is the first time I felt like a giant, for God's sakes. I'm 5'6", or I was 5'6" at that time, and here I look like, like a giant. To answer the specific question, Renee introduces me. I get up, I do my opening talk, and then I go into my opening, which is now with the few people that gave me their names this evening. And I always use that line, the few people, because the whole audience would stand up. And I said, with the few people I met, stand up. And that got a gasp right away, which is why I always said it that way. So with the few people I met, please stand up. 400 people stood up and went under the table because of the height, and they all disappeared. That's the question, yes. How did I make 400 people disappear? Little eyes started to come up off the table, and somebody said that. That's the best trick we ever took. You made us all disappear. Well, they all moved their stools to the front of their tables, sat on that so they could see me, and we I did the act that I usually did. It ended up one of the biggest laughs I've ever done.
Yeah, well, that's why I mentioned it, because I know I laughed out loud when I first read it. If you don't have this book, it's a re-memoir, is the way that Mel Brooks suggested Harry title this. It's called Before I Forget. I've read this thing probably 3 times, and there's just really phenomenal stories in here, and that is one of them. So thanks for sharing that, Harry. I'm going to put it on over to Mr. Powers. Apparently, Raphael Benatar was also there at this 4F convention when this video was taken. So, Mike, do you want to go ahead and set it up? What are you going to show us here?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud.
I see you, Mike. How are you?
Hi, Harry. How are you doing? Very quick story about meeting you. I won't take much time. There's a lot of people that want to talk to you. But I met you, I think it was 79 or 80. You did a lecture for Magic Inc. at a little church that was about a block away. Do you remember that?
Magic Inc. in what town?
In Chicago. So it
was yeah, I do. I remember it vaguely.
It was a church, and you had about normally a lecture would bring 20 people. You had like 120 people in there, packed this church, a small church, and you did a 4-hour lecture, and people were lined up to sign up for Apocalypse, and I think you were selling Quantum Leaps. Anyway, was how I got started with Harry Lorayne material and got Close-Up Card Magic and Quantum Leaps and on my way. But I was at Fechter's in 1991 when you were the guest of honor, and I think Raphael may have been there also. And I just found this video, but I don't think I've got the sound, so I'm not going to play a lot of it. But I thought you might enjoy seeing yourself at Fechter's 1991 as the guest of honor, being introduced by Jay Marshall. And I don't think I have sound here. I didn't think I had enough to figure out the sound system. So I'll be able to talk, I guess, while this plays. But can you see Jay Marshall there?
Yes.
Okay, so here Jay is talking and introducing you. Maybe it's good that there's no sound, because if I remember right, there was a little blue language being tossed around here. There's Obie O'Brien, and you were, I'm going to just run through this just for a minute. They're giving you various trophies and honors and things and talking about you. And evidently have a glass of wine or something there. And there you are as a 29 years ago. Taking a sip, and then you got up and Obie introduced you to come up and perform some magic. So I won't, since there's no sound, it's not as interesting, but there's the somewhat younger Harry Lorayne, the dynamo himself, still has this energy that's unbelievable at 94 years old. You're a dynamo, man. I can't believe it. I wish I had half the energy that you have today, let alone this guy that I'm looking at over here. So I hope you enjoyed that little tour of 1991. Nobody's ever seen this video, so there you are. I don't know what you're doing. Maybe you do.
Yeah, I don't know which trick I was doing.
Yeah, I'm sorry that there's not sound on that, but
I think he's doing.
anyway,
That looks
I
like
just wanted you to enjoy seeing yourself just a couple of years ago.
Amazing.
that's awesome. It looked like you
Thanks,
were
Harry.
performing "What a Mess" in that particular video with the dealing those 4 piles. And anyway, that's a great effect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What a mess. Yeah.
Thanks
it
for
might
sharing
have
that,
been.
Mike. That's really awesome. I sure like to see that with the sound put in there. I mean, that's
I will extract the video and of Harry and put it on the website later today so that everybody can see him and hear him, you know, hear his style, which I think we've seen in other videos. But it's so much fun. I mean, it's interesting just to watch you with no sound because you can see all that body language and how you're emoting,
Right.
you know. So it's one of those things where you can see the entertainment is there. You know, look at this. You don't even need sound.
oh, isn't that weird, Harry? To be 70 again, huh?
Yeah.
Oh God, yes.
That's really great. I have a question from Matt Gorelick. I'm so sorry if I'm slaughtering your name.
I'm here. Hi, Rudy.
There you are. Okay,
You
great.
did a good job with the pronunciation.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm sorry. Well, go ahead and you can go ahead and ask Harry your question.
Yeah. Hi, Harry. It's an honor to be here. Happy birthday. I
Thank
feel
you.
like it might be a little bit embarrassing to ask this in front of like so many incredible magicians, but you know, I just got started myself a couple of months ago, and I was wondering if like out of any of, you know, one of the hard things is there's so much material out there, particularly like that you have made. I'm wondering if there's any that you would suggest getting started with. You know, we all have to start somewhere. So,
What do you mean, for yourself?
yeah, for anybody. I mean, for myself.
Oh, well, that's an obvious answer. The magic book. I wrote the magic book. You want to hear the story why I wrote the magic book?
Yes, please.
Okay. I had a publisher, I won't mention their name, who did 2 of my books, the memory book and Remembering People, The Key to Success. I think those were the 2 books. They made him a lot of money. The memory book has sold, it's still out there, obviously, and it has sold millions of copies. It's in 11 languages that I know of. You know, these things keep getting stolen. Just before there was something about Munich, Germany, about one of my books that I didn't know anything about. So those things happen, you know, all the time. Anyway, the reason I mention it, he was a bit of a crook, and I wanted to get away from him. But in those days, don't forget, I wrote the memory book, which amazes me that it's still selling the way it sells. It came out in 1973, okay? Now, that's important to know when it was the time that it came out, which may not have anything to do with the fact that I thought the publisher was a crook. But I started to tell you that in those days, every publishing contract had one line always that said that the publisher had the right to the author's next book or books. That's the thing I wanted to get away from. I didn't want to give him another book, and I was ready to write another book. The head of the literary department at William Morris Agency, which was a very important agency, and Owen Lester was his name. He passed away a long time ago. And I told him, I don't want to do another book for this company. He said, you know, there's only one way to get away from that. You've got to do a book that will put up for auction if we have to. That means have other publishers bid on it. That he doesn't buy it, because if he gets the same book, you're going to get the same contract with that pointed line about he gets the right to the next book. Again, long story short, that's the only thing that I could think of that publisher would not want was a book on magic, because he had published quite recently, a couple of books on magic that didn't do very well or weren't very good, but they were, they were on magic, okay? That's what happened. And again, long story short, it went an auction for all publishers to bid on. I'm knocking wood mentally. People with a lot of money will give them a $40,000 advance. We'll give them a $90,000 advance. Went on and on and on, and with the same publisher who had done the memory book and the other book I mentioned was bidding until he finally bid out. He didn't want to bid any higher, which was the point of the whole thing. A different publisher got the rights to this book that I was going to do on magic. Now, and this always gets a laugh when I say it because it's true, I went up to William Morris at Owen Laster's office, and he said, well, great, we did it. He said, Harry, now there's only one thing you got to do. I said, what? He said, you got to write the darn book. I didn't have a book. I had written a couple of pages saying what I would write. I made it up. Okay, that became the magic book, which I wrote strictly for beginners. I had to. That's the only magic book I ever did for the public. And what's interesting, I have gotten letters, emails, phone calls from magicians all over the world saying that they learned so many good tricks and learned so much about doing magic generally, learned so much about magic from the magic book, which, as I say, I wrote really for out and out beginners. So that's the story of the magic book, and that answers your question, on which I spoke too long, that's the book you should start with.
Oh, that's
and you know, I'm sorry, I was going to say, and I hope Rudy doesn't mind this, you know, you could go to my site, harrylorrainemagic.com, but don't order from there. I'll tell you why. Prices are going up. My daughter-in-law is working at a whole new, she's rearranging the whole thing. So you can see what's available there. But the more important thing is to come to me personally. And that's Harry Lorayne at earthlink.net. Can you remember that, folks? If you haven't read my book on memory, you may not. Harry Lorayne, spell it correctly, of course. Harry Lorayne at earthlink.net. Then I'll be more than happy to talk to you, tell you what's available, tell you which books I think you should buy, and so forth and so on. So that's really the best help I can give you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Harry. Appreciate it.
Good answer.
Oh, my pleasure.
Of course, everybody's going to say buy anything that Harry publishes. But as for beginners, you know, I think also it's been mentioned here in the comment section that Close-Up Card Magic is a phenomenal book.
Well, a lot of people began with that book also, Rudy. Said a little more difficult stuff than I have in the magic book, but it's still a lot of good stuff that beginners could do. There's some stuff in there where you don't need any sleight of hand. One of them that people rave about is a trick called stop, exclamation point. You don't have to do any sleight of hand at all, and you blow people away with it.
Well, we have a question, speaking of your books. Ted, I don't want to mess up your last name. I'll guess that it's Stussy, but you're up next, and you can correct me on my pronunciation.
Stussy.
Close. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, I hear you.
Harry,
did I spell it right?
Almost. It's UE, but
what did I say? Stuessy.
That is correct. It's Stussy.
You know, this is interesting because names are kind of my business. I have heard names all over the world. You know, Japanese and German and you name it. So I'm interested in names, and yours is kind of an odd name. I've never heard that one other than you.
You made me think of something that's not my question. If I can just go to a brief aside.
Sure.
Many years ago, when my parents were alive, they booked you to speak for a group of sales executives. And in the process of booking, my mother had to call you several times. And perhaps several months after the initial consultation, she called you. And by hearing her voice alone, you remembered her name and said, "Hi, Ruth, how are you?"
You know, I remember that. She got all excited.
Well, it left a lifelong impression on my parents. And when I started reading your magic books, they found it quite interesting. I had to share that story with me.
Wow.
Right, I do remember that.
So to my point, though, the question is the one book I was late in trying to get. Do you have any intentions of reprinting either standard or digitally jaw droppers?
You mean jaw droppers? What? No. You know, I've had people offer me $500 for a copy of that book. You know, I'm getting too old for that stuff, so I'm not reprinting anything. A lot of my things are going out of print, and they will, unfortunately, stay out of print. And I try to leave. Unfortunately, I don't have a collector's mind, Bent. I never did. And my son has been yelling at me about that for a long time, to keep a dozen or so of my books so that after I get hit by a bus, he's got these books. They become collector's items. He can ask a lot of money for them. Like I said, people have offered me $500 for a copy of Jaw Droppers 1. No, I'm not going to sell them. I've left a few for my book. Let him make money from them.
Can I ask you one follow-up question, Harry?
Sure.
Do you have, and I have your memory book and enjoy it quite a bit. I haven't found a way to apply the concepts to auditory things, such as remembering a person's voice. In other words, I found it astounding you could remember my mother's name simply by hearing her voice. And I don't know if you ever approached that in a book.
No, I don't have a method for that at all for audio. I don't think there's any way you could do that. You know, I'll tell you what it boils down to. I said it before, and I'm going to say it again for a different reason. Even if my systems don't work, they must work. Okay, what I meant is they force you, without realizing it, to pay attention like you've never done before, to concentrate like you've never done before, to use your imagination like you've never done before, without realizing, you know, ordinarily, those three things I just mentioned seem like work. But when you try to apply my systems, they don't seem like work at all. It's an ordinarily normal thing. I'm going to pay attention, which means when you try to apply my systems, how are you going to remember a person's face when I tell you you've got to associate his name, which I'll tell you how to do that in a minute also, or tell you the concept, to an outstanding feature of the person's face. Well, how in the world are you going to find an outstanding feature on a person's face if you don't look at that face, which most people don't do? I've seen that all my life. I watch people talking and one person's looking over the other person's left shoulder to see who's important in this room, little realizing that maybe the person whose shoulder he's looking over is the most important person in that room. So what I'm trying to say, to answer your question about audio, if you pay that kind of attention that my systems force you to apply without realizing that you're working hard, because you're not really, this is a normal thing. We have a brain that's supposed to do those things. Then the voice becomes part of it. Since you're paying that close attention when the person talks to you, that's going to lock in also. And what I said about associating a name, and I don't want you, when this goes off, to say, oh, he said he was going to tell me about how to do a name and he didn't, he forgot, ha ha ha, so I better mention it. What you got to do is make the name meaningful. You meet a Mr. Bentivania. How do you know his name is Bentivania? Because if you're trying to apply my systems, even if they don't work, you have listened, which, as I say, people don't do. My systems force you to listen. You can't apply the rest of my system if you don't hear the name. So it's Mr. Bentivania. How in the world am I, and I teach you got to visualize everything. All 3,000 years ago, Aristotle, the first sentence in one of his books was, in order to think, we must speculate with images, meaning you got to visualize. How do you visualize a name like Bentivania? Maybe in Italian it means something. But when I originally met him, Mr. Bentivania, which I did, didn't mean anything to me in Italian. I know a little bit of Italian, you know. I'll say in Italian that I can speak Italian only to get by. You know, that's it. Anyway, the thing to do is to make the thing meaningful. Again, you got to use your brain. You got to use your imagination. You got to exercise your mind. When I heard Bentivania, I immediately thought of a bent weather vane. Bent vein. That's enough to remind me of Bentivania. And how do I visualize bent vein? Visualize a weather vane that has any northeast, west, and south on it, and see it bent. That's it. Bent vein. I just thought about it in order to come up with that name. As I told you, you had to listen. You had to do a little bit of thinking. Now, I said to you before, you associated the person's face to the most outstanding feature on its face. And I told you then, how do you find that without looking? You've done the two most important things, which is what I mean when I say, even if my systems don't work, they must work. You have listened in a way you never have before, if at all. And you've looked in a way with interest and attention as you never have before. Now, how do you end it? Those are steps 1 and step 2. Making the name meaningful, finding an outstanding feature on the face. Step 1, step 2. Step 3 is to make one remind you of the other, to associate the two of them. How did I do that? You pick an outstanding feature. Mr. Pennsylvania had a big nose. That's the first thing I saw. Somebody else might look at his face and say, oh, well, the high forehead. I don't care. As long as you looked and picked out one thing. I saw the big nose. What's the rest of the step 3? As I shook his hand, I visualized not a nose, but a bent weather vein there instead of a nose. That's it. I can never forget that. I never have. I don't know why I taught you all this free of charge.
I bought the book.
Oh, okay.
Does that
Harry, thanks very much. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you so much.
That's awesome. You know, you wrote a book, Ageless Memory. I'm just amazed, Harry. I'm sure everybody else is. How when you're 94 and there's just such clarity and energy in the way that you're communicating and talking after all these years. I mean, if nothing else, it's just a testament to the truth of what it is that you've taught for most of your life. It's just really.
I think, you know, Rudy, it's interesting that you say that, because I think exercising the mind has something to do with it. I really do. Now, I'm not a doctor. I have 1 year of high school, so I'm not going to tell you things that have to do with medicine or things like that. But I honestly, personally feel that, you know, another thing I wrote years ago, let your right arm hang down like this. I don't know if you can see it, for a month or two without using it, or however long it takes, and it's going to atrophy. You won't be able to use it anymore. Well, the same thing with your mind. Stop using it and atrophies. After a while, you can't use it anymore, or it's not very useful at all. So I think using your mind, and I cannot think of a better mind exercise than my systems, my books, etc.
Absolutely. I agree. I'm a huge fan. Excellent. We have a question from someone who might be an old friend, Bernie Trueblood. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to you, Bernie. I'm spotlighting your video. You may have to unmute yourself, but you have the floor. So go ahead and share what it is, your question with Harry.
Hi, Harry. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I don't know if you remember me or not. I used to sit in awe of you at Rossoff's restaurant in New York City at the Magic Table in the late 1960s, like 50 years ago.
Boy.
You are almost personally responsible for me losing my job, because I always got back to work late. I had so much fun watching you. And what I admired the most was your hair.
Oh.
I don't have to have that resentment anymore, I can say.
Right.
I just have a simple question, because I'm trying to remember back in those days. What is the favorite non-card trick that you ever performed?
You know, the only thing that comes to mind, two things come to mind. One, more within the general magic area, was my coins through the table, and I used to do a coin matrix thing. It ended up, I started to do it with dollar bills. It was one of the things I used to do at a table quite often for years. I would borrow $4 bills and ask the people to crumple them up, or make them into ball shape paper. And I put the 4 down here and then do a general matrix, routine with the bills. I could also do it with coins, and I did coins through the table. And I was very good at sleeving. I used to fool the heck out of magicians making coins disappear. Sleeving. I think I have that on one of my best ever DVDs. I always hesitate when I say that word. you know, people, again, years ago when these came out, started to talk about my ego, best ever. I didn't make that title. L&L Publishing made that title, and I didn't want him to do that title. I realized I'm pretty good at thinking ahead a little bit, and that's why whenever I mention my best ever DV set, there are 4 volumes, I put it in quotes. I didn't make up that title. Like I say, L&L Publishing did. So anyway, I think a couple of sleeving things, which I did quite well because I fooled magicians with it. So anyway, to answer your question, and the other thing that I started to mention was a rubber band thing that I called Snap. I think I taught that originally in Reputation Makers, so that it would now be in Lorayne, the Classic Collection, Volume 2. Volume 1 is sold out anyway. Thank you for the plug opportunity. So, but I think it was originally Reputation Makers, and it was a very handy thing because very often I would be paying a bill at a diner and I'd see a rubber band laying there. I'd pick it up and say, oh, look at it. Oh, it broke. Oh, my God. Little magic step. I figured it restored it. That was the trick. So to answer your question, those are the 2, the coin things and the bills that I just mentioned, plus the rubber band.
Yeah, I remember the sleeving. It got me fascinated with that.
I was pretty good at that, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, happy birthday, and thanks for taking my call.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Great. Up next, we have, first of all, you doing okay, Harry? We have some.
I'm doing the best I can.
You're doing excellent. Make sure we don't exhaust you here. Ray Jagers, a friend of mine, wants to ask you a question. So Ray, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight your video. Let's see if yours is working. And this, okay, so here's Ray. Go ahead, my friend. Go ahead and talk to Harry.
Harry, first of all, happy birthday.
Thank you, sir.
We are so blessed to be able to have you with us. Rudy, I think, stated in one of his emails that we were going to have a living legend with us today.
Yeah, I'm a legend in my own mind.
Well, you're a legend among the rest of all of us. Anybody that knows anything about magic knows Harry Lorayne. A couple things. First, a comment, then a question. The comment is, and this has come up in a lot of books, but some of the accolades that you've gotten over the years include some very good magicians that have written books and have discussed Harry Lorayne. And I always thought that it must have been a high compliment when magicians would say things like, if my life depended on fooling somebody and entertaining them, more importantly, the first person I'd choose is Harry Lorayne. And that's the way I've always thought of you, Harry, as the consummate entertainer. You talked about it earlier, that was always your goal. But I just wanted to let you know that you've entertained the hell out of all of us. So we thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure, sir.
So my question is, well, it's a simple question and maybe not a simple answer, but you know, some of us have been doing magic for a lot of years, but you know, our careers either stall or we get into a different career and magic takes a back seat. And with you, of course, you never gave up magic. You had your memory career and your you know, your memory and your magic career running concurrently. One of the things which just boggles my mind, Harry, is the fact that you left New York City and got in a car with I think there were 4 people and a driver, if I remember right, if I remember the story right. It was you and Renee and your buddy and his wife, and you headed down to Florida, and I think you had something like $9 in your pocket. Harry, you must have been so driven to succeed. I mean, nobody in their right mind would have the chutzpah even to do something like that. And it honest to goodness, it makes me ashamed of not having the guts to try to, you know, go out myself and find places to do magic.
Well,
so
you know,
if you talk about that a little bit.
I don't know if I'm thinking of the same thing that you're talking about. What happened, you're going back to when I was very, very young. And nobody really knew who I was. I was just starting out. And what happened, there was a lady, she had seen me at a trade show, at a show where a lot of people, and I was doing magic. And she said, you know, I own a nightclub in Florida. And I would like, you're so terrific, I'd like to make you the host. She's talking to a young kid. I had no experience. Now she's telling me I would be the host. If we're talking about the same things, I lived in New York City. My wife and I, we didn't even have suitcases. We packed a bunch of stuff in corrugated boxes. We put it in her car, which I'll never forget. It was a Hudson. I don't even know if those exist anymore. So it was my wife, myself. There was another girl in it who played the guitar. She was going to try to make it there. And maybe another guy. I can't place him. But I remember the lady driving the car. I remember what started to happen. We would, for example, it started at the George Washington Bridge. She stopped. You had to pay a toll. I don't know if it's the same thing today. Nowadays, you could drive through and they put it on your card, whatever they call it. But we came there, and the lady said to me, oh, does one of you have a quarter? Hard for me to reach into my pocketbook. I took out a quarter, and we paid. And that happened during the rest of the trick. I ended up with only $6 in my pocket. And one of the things that happened, oh God, you're bringing back terrible memories. We were in Raleigh, North Carolina, and she's driving. We're in the city, and I don't know what happened at the wheel or something, but the car went out of control, and she went up a stoop of a house with the car. Fortunately, stopped just before she went through the door. What happened after that, I said, I don't want to drive with you anymore. I ended up driving the rest of the way to Florida. And again, a long story short, my wife and I, we get to a curb in downtown Miami, and we take out our corrugated boxes. And the lady says, I got to go see something. I'm going to come back, empty the car, and I'll come back and pick you up. She drove away, and that's the last we ever saw of her. That's it. So my wife and I are on a curb in a place we've never been before with, I don't know, 3 or 4 dirty cartons of clothes or whatever. Ended up at a hotel. In those days, you could check in a hotel. You didn't have to have money in advance. I had no money. Like I said, I had $6. We checked into the hotel. I left all my stuff. We were hungry. We went to the Governor cafeteria. I'll never forget it because that became another part of my life. We went to the Governor cafeteria, and I spent $4 of the $6 I had. I had $2 left. That was my trip to Miami, Florida. There's more to that story, but that answers your specific question.
Yeah, is that good, Rudy?
I could write a book.
Well, is my audio still up, Rudy?
Yes, it sure is.
I hear you, yeah.
My point in having you retell the story, and by the way, I think your buddy Dave, the guy that you used to pitch Svengali decks, I think he was in the car.
David Walker.
Yeah, Dave Walker. My point in telling the story was simply this. You're cut out of a very unique cloth, Mr. Lorayne, because there aren't a whole lot of people nowadays, and I'm sure there weren't very many back then, that would have taken the risk, almost on a lark, to just jump in a car and head south with almost nothing in your pocket.
But you know what? There really is an easy question to answer. That there are very few people, and I can say it now because thank God I'm out of it a long time ago and a very long way ago. There was nothing that could happen in my life that wouldn't be better than what existed at that time. It's hard for me to think of.
I can understand that, yeah.
When the opportunity came up to get a better life, to take a step above the misery that I was in, how can I not take it? So there wasn't much bravado there. I was doing something that I thought was going to be better for me, not worse. So I don't know if that answers your question, but, you know, it was a very important part of my life. You know, to continue on this for a moment, we ended up starving in Miami. I mean, almost literally starving in Miami because, like I say, I had no money. And then strange things started to happen. I told you, I mentioned the governor's cafeteria. Oh, I was doing a card trick with somebody, and there was one table with a bunch of guys look like this, you know, and they had little bumps in their jackets where they carried, I assume, guns. Before you know it, I was invited to that table. And it ended up, these guys, they were all conmen. One of the things they did, and you know, you can't make up these things. One day, one of them says to me, listen, Harry, when you go to get a glass of water, I don't know if cafeterias are the same now. In those days, there was a little area where you walked over and there were all glasses, you know, drinking glasses, and there was a thing shaped like this that you put your glass in and pressed, and water came into your glass. So this guy says to me, listen, Harry, within the next 5 minutes, you go there, you go to the third glass from the top of the row, and when you push it into the hook, press a little harder, because it's going to break. It's already set up. We want blood to come out of your hand so we can sue the governor's cafeteria. That's what he wanted me to do. And I think that's when I lost their friendship, in quotes, because I said, I can't take a chance of cutting my hand. I do card tricks with that hand. And I wouldn't do it. But that's how I got all these things that happened to you. For God's sakes, when I'm starving to death, that would have helped, but I wasn't about to do that.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. That's really great. I'm going to now, let me see if we got John on here now. John Henderson, I'm going to go ahead and put your camera spotlighted, so share your question with Harry.
It's so good to see you.
It's funny, now I hear you, but I don't see you. Now I see you, John.
Oh, my goodness. So anyway, Harry, you've been my inspiration throughout my life. I remember way back in my early teens, I tried to learn card magic from Expert Card Technique, was ready to give up. And then I came upon Close-Up Card Magic, and that just opened up the world for me. And all your books subsequently, just wonderful. I remember seeing you in New York City at the cafeteria after Tannen's on Saturdays. And I remember on a couple of occasions, I was able to publish a couple of things inside of Apocalypse, and I was always amazed at how I never had to give you any kind of a write-up. You would just remember it and write it beautifully. So thank you for that. But I guess my question, Harry, was, having grown up in New Jersey, my mentor growing up in magic was Herb Zarrow. And I was wondering if you remember any stories of Herb and Phyllis Zarrow. I know he's
we were very friendly. Herb and his wife were very friendly. I wrote quite a bit of his stuff. So there isn't much I could tell you about it. We used to meet at Tannen's very often. Then I started to go to their house, you know, with my wife for dinner. So we were very friendly, and he was one of the very good magicians. I learned a lot from him. I'm hoping he learned from me, but I did learn a lot from him. He was very good, and I miss Herb Zarrow a lot. You mentioned some books that you read. You know, when I was very young growing up, I didn't know about these books. You know, Ernest at the card table, all these. I didn't know them. I didn't know these books at all. Maybe that was a good thing. You know, I wrote an article, so many years ago, titled, I may have mentioned this before, How Bad Can Become Good. And I started to tell you that about my dyslexia, and maybe I didn't finish it. So now you've given me the opportunity to finish that thought, but it locks in the whole thing. Being dyslexic is certainly not a good thing. That's a bad thing. But that gave me a career, because if it wasn't for my dyslexia, which made me get bad grades, which made my father punch me and punish me, I would not have started to learn how to remember things, which gave me a heck of a career. So that's what I mean by a bad thing, like dyslexics, being dyslexic. being a good thing, because if it wasn't for the dyslexia, I wouldn't have been what Time magazine called the Yoda of memory training, or the world's most foremost memory training specialist. So, you know, the first article in that article, the first part of that article that I wrote about the dyslexia, oh God, this is going to be hard for me to talk about, but I started it. I better finish it. And Rudy, if I'm talking too much, you have my permission to stop me, okay? I was in the Army. We were in training. They used to check our canteens to make sure we didn't drink the water. I don't know why. The outfit was called IRTC, which stands for the Infantry Replacement Training Center. It was a suicide squad. After the training, you would go overseas and you had to take the place of any infantryman that was either wounded or killed. You had to take his place and know how to handle whatever he was handling, which weapon, the BAR, that's the Browning automatic rifle. Remember that, or the M16 rifle, whatever. That's why, you know, in those days, I don't know if they still do it, when you got into the Army, they gave you an intelligence test. I thought that if you got a good high mark, you know, intelligence mark, that you got a better position. No, it worked just the opposite. Because what I just told you, you had to have some intelligence to learn all the things that an infantryman used, all the different weapons, all the different things. So I would have been smarter to get a lousy mark. But no, I got a high mark. I got into this great outfit. Okay, back to the point. I didn't want to drink the water in my canteen because they checked at it. Don't ask me why. You were supposed to be able to take this 20-mile hike without drinking water, okay? One day, I'm walking and I see water because the sun was hitting it certain way. We had walked that way before. I never saw this pond before, but I guess maybe the way the sun was situated, I saw it. It was a pond of water. So this great Lower East Side brain, I had enlisted, so I was only 17 and a half. So this great brain said, oh, I'll drink some of that water so I don't have to take water from my canteen. Long story short, I ran over. I drank the water. It was stagnant water. That night, I had 106 degrees temperature. I ended up with typhoid fever. Okay? Why am I telling you this about bad things becoming good? Typhoid fever ain't a good thing. It's a bad thing. But when I was in the hospital, my outfit, the entire company went overseas, Company E, and none of them came back. How can typhoid be a good thing? It was for me. It saved my life. I don't know why I'm telling you this story, but you asked for it, you got it. Oh, God.
Thanks, John.
Thanks so much, Harry.
Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, it's not my pleasure, but,
well, it's a
you know, sometimes it's amazing. I'm talking about when I was 17 and a half, Rudy. So do the math. How many years ago? I'm 94 now, and I still get very emotional when I think about it and talk about it.
Harry, I know it's painful, and I appreciate you sharing it because I know it's not easy, and you've had a lot of difficulties. You've shared some of those stories with me. Well, they're for sure in your re-memoir, but you've shared some of those stories, and you've lived quite a difficult life. I mean, I know that you're successful and all of that, but I mean, starting out, you grew up broke as a joke. Your dad was incredibly. The way he passed away is traumatic beyond what can be conveyed. In fact, for those who, you know, again, I know it's difficult, but you put it in your book, so I know that you're not going to talk about it. And before I forget, with regard to
I mean, which subject?
How your daddy passed away.
Oh, I could mention that very quickly. He jumped out of a hospital window 16 stories up.
But I mean, and then here's what the thing, and I mentioned this in one of our previous interviews. That is incredibly traumatic. You were just a kid, and
I was 12 years old.
And you know, to think that though your relationship with him was anything but healthy or good, and then he died in such a traumatic, abrupt way, all the unresolved tension with that has in many ways shaped who you are, for better, worse, all of that. So you're a very complicated, complex, as we all are, but you're a very complicated person. And this side of you that people don't often see it's beautiful to watch. I mean, you're very emotional, and a lot of us guys don't like to express that. I'm glad that you're not ashamed, but I hope it gives people the opportunity to see the side of you that is very. People tend to think about the ego. I mean, you talk about that, right? People tend to go to the ego. Yeah, well, you know, it's understandable that you were, for the most part of your early life. So,
Yeah, the most part of my early life, forget about ego. Like I said, I was the shyest kid in the world. Of course, a lot of people, as I was growing up, say you're overcompensated, which I did because I had to. You know, I maybe, you know, I'll tell you, you know, one of the hardest things that I had to do, Rudy, and this is interesting because it was the start, kind of the start of my career, was when I wanted to remember the names of an audience I was going to work for, going to appear for, the shyness, getting over the shyness of approaching a table and asking for their names was one of the most difficult things I ever had to do.
It's crazy to imagine you as being a shy person ever.
Oh God, you can't imagine how shy. Listen, I was shy to the point where I couldn't raise my hand in the bathroom in the classroom when I had to go to the bathroom. I don't want to tell you the end of that story.
Oh wow, yeah, I can only imagine.
I mean, it was like I said, to the point of sickness. Wow. So card magic, you know, when I talk about card magic and my love for card magic, it literally changed my life.
Thanks, Harry. We're gonna take a few more questions. I want to be mindful of the time here. Evil Dan it's actually Dan. I don't know how you say your last name, Dan. I want to guess though. Is it Teramis?
Nope, Relmus.
Dang it. All right. Well, I can relate, man. People slaughter my name. Harry's probably the only one of the few guys who's pronounced my last name right. But I'm going to spotlight your video. Dan, please feel free to share your question with Harry.
Hey, happy birthday, Harry. Hey,
thank you so much.
Congratulations. Hey, I got a friend that saw you at a convention one time, and I think, or maybe at just a hotel, and somebody brought you over, and he hates card tricks, but he said that you came over, they asked if you could just perform something, and he goes, and you proceeded to entertain him for like over an hour, and he said the most amazing card magic that he's ever seen. He was thoroughly entertained. And my question is, if you're, when put in a situation like that, do you have like a set of card tricks that you normally do, or do you just kind of go according to, like, you know, what you feel at the moment, or how do you choose your material in a situation like that?
It's not according to how I feel at the moment. What it's according to is the audience. Because I can really very quickly see what they like or what they don't. But as the years went by, I always had what I call standards. For example, now, when I'm handed a deck of cards, I always open with my Halo Aces. And that leads to another trick with the four aces, and to another. I can do an hour or a week probably with just 4 ace tricks. But I know the ones that hit hardest. But I always open with the Halo Aces. That's one of the strongest things for me that I know of, is to take a shuffled deck, cut it into 4 piles, and the 4 aces are on top of each pile.
Great answer.
Thank you very much.
It's really good.
Oh, my pleasure.
Good to see you, Dan. Mr. Breger, I'm going to go ahead and highlight your video. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Thanks, Rudy. And again, Harry, happy birthday to you. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me.
I hear you and see you, Mike.
That's your problem if you can see me, Harry. So you've
it's both our problems.
Yeah, you know, I've said this on the Magicians Forum. Here we are. It's your birthday, Harry, but we are the ones getting the birthday gift, having a chance to talk to the birthday boy, and just this conversation about life and the pursuit of happiness, and what you have done and what you have given to us. It's been present after present after present for all these years. I know I've told you this before, Harry. I'm very, very sincere. You know, you mean an awful lot to us, and you certainly have meant an awful lot to Magic over the years, and will continue to do so. But let's talk about Johnny Carson.
Okay.
You were on the Tonight Show 24 times, 25 times.
24.
But who's counting? Through the 24 times that you were on the Tonight Show, surely you must have had some experiences that were more memorable than other experiences. And I'm hoping that you might be able to share one or two of those with us.
I can't think of anything that's really outstanding. The most outstanding thing to me was Johnny's reaction whenever I talked to him, or whenever I did the what do you call it? Remember the names of everybody in the audience. You know what's funny? What comes to mind that's outstanding has nothing to do with the show. Now, I've talked about this recently somewhere. It may sound repetitive to some people. Johnny Carson and I became good friends. And he always said to me, when you come to do my show, of course, we're together, we go out to dinner afterwards, etc. But if you're in California, if you're in Los Angeles, even when you're not booked on the show, give me a call. So I'm free, we can get together. And I don't know if you know this, I'm sure most people do. Johnny was interested in magic. He started really doing ventriloquism, but then he got interested in magic. Anyway, the reason what came to mind when you asked this had nothing to do with the show. It had to do with the Magic Castle. I wanted to take Johnny Carson to the Magic Castle, where I'm an honorary member. I don't remember if I was an honorary member then. I am now and have been for decades. But at that time, I don't know. But anyway, we went to the Magic Castle, and here's the story. Johnny was wearing a turtleneck and a $3,000 or $4,000 suit, and they wouldn't let him in because he was wearing a turtleneck. That's why I remembered. I said, it's Johnny Carson, for God's sakes. They wouldn't let him in. We went out, we laughed, we had dinner. And, you know, the tagline on that story, sometime later, I went with my wife, Renee, and she was wearing a $3,000 or $4,000 slack suit. That is pants. $3,000 or $4,000. They wouldn't let her in. Jeez. They said their rule was women have to wear a skirt or a dress. I think because of me, because I started to scream quite a bit, and I knew the Larsons, etc., and I yelled and screamed. I think that changed. I think now with a decent slack suit, a woman can go in, and I think turtlenecks are okay, but I don't know. I haven't been there in a lot of years.
Wow. Yeah. They've loosened the dress code considerably, and they certainly have lowered their standards for admission because they let me in. And I think Rudy, you've been there a few times, and again, it's a great story, Harry. Thanks a lot.
It is.
It's my pleasure. It's a true story.
Well, fellas, I'm gonna invite my some of you have become familiar with my bride because she's in all my videos. She wanted to say happy birthday to you, Harry. This is Charlie.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure to see you. The only time I see you is when he's doing card tricks for you. A pleasure to see you.
Also, and Jen and Drake, they become kind of, when they said happy birthday to Harry from Drake and Jen. They've been on all the Halo Project videos and the Apocalypse Now. They're very well acquainted with you, Harry. So happy birthday.
Yes, cheers to many more.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure to see you.
You're so gorgeous. Well, how about we just take a couple more questions? I don't have to drop off because speaking of Drake and Jen, we're going to be meeting with them for dinner. They're the one couple that we've actually been able to not be social distancing from, and so.
Right.
But are there any other questions? Because I think we've asked everything that's in the chat box. So let me just very quickly, for those of you, I think most of the folks who are left here, they're members of the Magicians Forum, but for those of you who aren't and who maybe came to this conference call based on an email that I sent on behalf of Harry, I would invite you to go and pay us a visit at themagiciansforum.com. We've really tried to create what is, I think, a very healthy, respectful, friendly atmosphere to discuss magic without all the grammar police and trolls and all of that stuff. So I'd invite you to come and hang out and join us. We have what's called the Magicians Forum Live, which is an online conference, but it'll have a similar vibe to this, we're going to have some really fantastic magicians there. So for more information, just go to themagiciansforum.com and you'll see some stuff there. I do see Steve Christian, who is a friend of mine, a dear friend. I'm going to go ahead and let him ask what will essentially be the last question. So Steve, it's all yours, my brother. Here you go.
Okay.
No, I see you and I hear you.
Harry, it's so great to see you just with such vitality on this special birthday. It gives me hope for 61.
Okay. To be 61 again.
I'm making the most out of 60 right now,
All right.
Harry. And Rudy has become such a great friend, and I owe it all to you, Harry. I got an email from you, I guess it's a little over 4 years ago, that said, go check out a new forum, the Magicians Forum. And I signed up, and Rudy and I have become great friends through that. And I just, I enjoy, when I tell people to go to the forum, when I meet a magician, I tell them to go. I say, you know, Harry's there almost every day. And if you have any questions for him, he's happy to, happy to respond. And so it's great to, it's expanded my social circle of magicians. I've met so many terrific guys, pros, hobbyists, guys who are just starting out, all who've been inspired through the forum. So there's a question coming, but first and foremost, I just wanted to thank you for that.
My pleasure.
And I'll tell you what, I could listen to you. You keep saying you talk too much. I can listen to you speak for hours. I was just watching. I have your DVD sets, the 4 DVDs through
Right.
L&L, and the effects are great. The methods are fantastic. The teaching is on point. But sometimes I just watch them. I just put them on, Harry, just to get infused with that energy. And I know you hear it all the time. And you hear about your ego all the time. You know, if it wasn't for ego, the Sistine Chapel would have an acoustic ceiling. All right.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because I've written about this also. Without ego, nothing would be accomplished.
No.
How could somebody write a book and think that he's so good that other people are going to read it? That's ego. Well, if there was no ego, nothing would be accomplished. There's good ego, there's bad ego, but we got to have ego to get anything accomplished.
Right. So true. Fortune favors the brave. And if you're trying to do, if you're trying to perform as a magician or write a book or really any creative endeavor without confidence, it's a real uphill struggle, I'm sure. So my question for you, I had a couple questions and they both got asked. Just hearing about, being backstage on television, that golden era, and you've told some great stories about that. And then also you're a living commercial for your books on memory, and particularly your books that have focused on memory practices for people as they age. I know that someone was asking about improving your oral memory. And I remember when I first got into your books, this was years and years ago, I was wondering if it would help me in music. And someone said, no, it really doesn't. You know, that's another kind of rote practice. But there are a lot of things that are similar. Paying attention and assigning and linking certainly is a part of learning music. You talked about letting an arm hang, just letting a part of you
Right.
atrophy.
Yeah.
When you exercise that arm, you're exercising muscles in your back, you're exercising muscles here in your chest, you're exercising
Right.
your shoulder, your neck. And so everything's connected. And I think that these memory exercises and these techniques help in so many things. And getting back to ego, they help with confidence.
Of course.
They help with confidence. But here's the question. I used to work on a weekly magazine out of LA, the LA Weekly, Arts and Entertainment magazine. They had some political stuff in there. And this was before the computer came out. So this is back early 80s. And I've often thought, as I've read through Apocalypse, about the amount of effort, burning the midnight oil. You can see it's done on a typewriter, for God's sake. And I was just hoping that, again, I guess there's not a question here, but just have you talk a little bit about the process of putting that together. You were a two-man shop to put that together. Is that correct?
I don't know what you mean by two-man. I did all the writing and whatever else I could think of.
You had an illustrator.
I'm sorry?
Correct. You had an illustrator who helped.
Oh, of course, yeah. The last few years my son did for me. So I had different illustrators over the 20 years, yeah.
it was just, and you were putting it out monthly, correct? It was coming every month of every
month.
year.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you, as somebody who used to paste up and take the word processing and paste it down on the page and make sure it fit, and when it didn't, have to figure out how to make it fit, my hat is off to you. I don't have a hat, but it's off to you anyway.
Thank you. I talked about it before. I look back at it now, honestly, I can't believe I did it. And as I said before, during the busiest part of one of the busiest parts of my life, but the fact that I got it out on time, all those 2 decades, I'm amazed when I look back at it. So I'm if I had to do it again, forget about it. There's no way.
Well, there's a lot of tools available now that would streamline the process. But you know what Benjamin Franklin said: if you want something done, give it to a busy person. The other kind has no time.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, lucky us, Harry, you've given us a wealth of great magic, and it's made me a better magician. And that's why I'm really just committed to sharing it with as many people as I can through the Halo Project, Real Magic, or stuff like this, just making sure your name's not forgotten, as though it could. But
thank you anyway. Thank you, Rudy.
I love you. I appreciate you, and thank you for taking time out of your day to hang out with us like this. Hopefully, we can do it again. Actually, this was wonderful. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I know I did. But thank you.
Anytime, Rudy. As long as I'm vertical, anytime.
Great. Well, may you be vertical for many more years. Thank you, everyone, for taking time to join us. I will have this video posted by tomorrow afternoonish. So thank you so much for joining us, and you guys have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you very soon. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Bye.